Oh man, it's stripped out, look at that. This screw is so high quality, I can drive it with a drill bit. In this video, we're gonna look at some common problems that beginners and DIYers have with screws and how to solve those problems the simple way. Do you ever have this situation where you're trying to drill a hole or put a screw right in the middle of something, but for whatever reason, the screws always end up off center or worse yet, crooked? Maybe you sharpen your pencil really good, or you grab your favorite pen thinking it's more precise than anything, and you make this mark around a circle. All right, now you should be able to put those right in the middle, right? So then you grab your handy drill bit and you try to put it right in the middle, and exactly that happens. Somehow, a drill bit never goes in the center of the circle when you want it to. Even worse, if you try to do it 3 times, let's try it a couple times more. Yeah, that one's pretty bad too. Let's go right in the middle. Oh yeah, that's a great example of how bad this can be. Okay, so we've got the circle that we used the pen to draw where the center of the screw would be, and then we have the actual hole, and you can see the hole is wildly to one side. This one in the middle here is a little less bad, and look how bad this one is. Of course, you take your hinge or whatever it is that you're trying to mount up and then set it in there, and it becomes more obvious that those screw holes are just horribly misaligned. And so now if you put the screws in to try to fasten this down, those screws are going to be off center. It's either going to pinch or twist, or worse yet, your screws go in at some weird angle and the heads just look ugly. Now, if this was an actual door hinge or where you're mounting something had to be precise and this hinge wasn't allowed to move around to compensate for the awkwardness of the screws, this would be even worse. But look how this screw cannot sit down in that hinge because of the location of the hole. And you just end up with these ugly, gaudy installations. If you're someone that likes your projects to be neat and tidy, something like this will drive you nuts. I remember when I first discovered this tool and how much of a game changer it was in my mind, and it's crazy how many uses I have found for it. So this little tool is called a VIX bit. It's a brand name. It is a self-centering drill bit. So inside this little sheath is a drill bit, and it's spring loaded so that you can simply push it in to whatever you're trying to drill a hole into. Let me show that from the side. And so you can see that the tip of this is actually slightly beveled, and that allows the drill bit to self-center in whatever you're trying to drill. Now, there are different sizes. As you can see with this door hinge, this one would not self-center because it's too small. So this one is smaller, and it's meant for things like cabinets or maybe smaller installations. I'm gonna step this up 1 notch, and this is a combination VIX bit and driver in one. So if you're doing installations like this on a regular basis, you unlock this bit, flip it around, and hiding inside is a VIX bit. And this allows you to drill a self-centering hole and then flip it around and drive the screw with the driver side. All right, we're gonna up the ante on this one. We're actually gonna mark this hinge so that we will know if this hinge has moved at all in this process. We're gonna go ahead and use our combination bit here, and we can self-center these holes. Now, I'm gonna give you a little cheat real quick. We're gonna put 1 screw in because that's gonna keep the hinge exactly where we want it while we drill the other holes. Look how the hole is dead center, and look how these other screws are nice and centered and flush. And look how our hinge did not move from the line that we drew around the edges. And our final screw, bingo. And look at that. They're all nice and even, nice and flush. I'll let your imagination run wild on use cases for this bit, but I'll tell you, you're gonna be looking for reasons to use this because it's so simple and so easy to drill self-centering holes. You can buy these bits individually, or you can buy them in a set. And when you buy them, they'll tell you on the package what the screw numbers are that the bit is designed to drill for. If you're doing some serious DIY, or maybe you're even a contractor and you're doing a lot of cabinet installs, door installs, hardware installs, installs, something like that, you owe it to yourself to grab one of these combination bits. They're super handy. Of course, you can change out the driver bit here. It's got a small set screw. You can change this to Torx, Robertson, Phillips, whatever it is that you want to use, and then it's got your self-centering bit on the other side. And again, just make sure that you're getting the right size of VIX bit to fit your application. Maybe you're using a screwdriver for this task and you're having a hard time getting a screw started. Like this small screw that's included with a lot of screw kits, it doesn't really engage with the screwdriver well. So if you know where you want the screw to go, but let's say you're trying to use a screwdriver for this task and you're having a hard time because the screw is kind of long and the head doesn't really engage. I know you guys have had this happen and you push really hard and you end up stabbing yourself with the screwdriver, which feels amazing. What you can do is get the screw set right where you want it to be, and then take your small hammer and give it a firm, straight hit. And now the screw is set, sort of like a nail, just enough that we can now grab our screwdriver and we should be able to go ahead and drive this screw easily. Look at that. This process works whether you have really long screws like this wood screw. You can also give this one a firm hit. It'll stay there, and now you can actually grab that with either the drill or your screwdriver. Of course, if you have small screws, this one can be a little more challenging because your fingers aren't very big. But if you're careful, you can get in there and maybe give it a few taps. Once it's sort of set like that, a firm tap, and it should stay. And again, now you can go ahead and put that screw in with your screwdriver. Do you feel like no matter what you do, sometimes it feels like the screws that you're trying to put in just strip out? That is super annoying, especially when you're just trying to get a project done. There's actually two main reasons this happens. Let's look at both reasons. The first cause of constant stripping often comes down to just the screw quality. These screws are the type of screws that are often included in the kits that you buy to do things like towel rods or hang a mirror or something like that. And while they look like a decent screw, they're actually made of a very soft metal. And this metal, if your screwdriver or your drill bit is worn at all, they're going to cam out and just strip the head immediately. Oh man, it's stripped out. Look at that. This screw is so high quality, I can drive it with a drill bit. Isn't that crazy? One thing you'll notice about these screws is that the engagement for the screwdriver or drill bit is actually very, very shallow. And this often leads to a very poor connection between the two. And so no matter how much you try, it feels like the screwdriver wobbles inside the bit. I know you know exactly what I'm talking about because it kind of leads to this uncomfortable feeling like, is this thing going to poke me or stab me? And getting away from these screws is the first thing you can do to stop stripping them out. While these two screws might not look that different, the one on the right is a much higher quality screw, and the head offers much more engagement for the bit or the driver. And so these are something you can basically take this bit, throw it in the trash, and switch it out for this screw. You can do one better and move to a completely different drive system, something like the Torx system that is much less prone to stripping. So throw this screw in the trash and replace it with something of a higher quality, and just that alone, you're going to strip less screws. The next thing that contributes to stripping out a screw is using the wrong bit. This is a Phillips bit, but it's actually a size 1 Phillips. And even though this screw is high quality, notice how the bit has a lot of movement in the screw. Sure, it'll work. I mean, it might, but it probably could strip the screw also, especially if you're in a high torque application. This screw is actually designed for a number 2 Phillips. You'll see on this Phillips bit, it says P2. This is a number 2 Phillips. The one in the driver is actually a number 1 Phillips. The difference is very small, but it's significant in not stripping screws. And if we put the number 2 Phillips in, notice how there's very little movement in the screw. You can put a lot of force on this and it's not going to strip. And the last thing that's a major contributor to stripping screws is the quality of your bit. If your bit is worn at all, you're better off just going ahead and throwing it away. Get a new bit. Both of these are Torx T20 bits, but notice this one is pretty substantially rounded off. Notice how crisp this bit is, and you'll find that when you get a brand new bit, the engagement on the screw is just incredibly crisp. I mean, this thing has no movement whatsoever inside that screw, but if I use this worn bit, it's pretty amazing how much this thing moves inside the bit. Look at that. If you're enjoying this video, take a moment and give it a like. And if you know somebody who's a beginner or maybe a DIYer, give this video a share and hopefully they can benefit from these tips. Do you feel like when you DIY a wood project it's not very sturdy or strong? I want to show you a really common error when assembling wood parts that makes them particularly weak and a simple fix to make them extra strong. When we look at a board, it basically has three types of grain. It has what we call the face grain, which is sort of the width of the board. It has the edge grain, and it has the end grain. When we try to fasten two boards when they're laying on their faces, and we insert a screw through the face of one, through the edge of another, into the end grain of the second board, it is actually a particularly weak connection. In fact, the end grain is one of the weakest parts of a board. The strongest parts are the face and the edge. Making a very small change here, instead of inserting the screw through the face into the end grain of this board, we instead insert the screw from the face of this one into the edge grain of this board, is going to make this joint substantially stronger. If you're in a situation where you need to butt the end grain of a board up to the face grain of another board, the temptation might be to take your screw and insert it through the face grain of this board into the edge grain of this board. But that's actually a fairly weak connection because you're attaching to the end grain of this board. So if instead we attach through the face grain of this board diagonally into the face grain of this board, we get a much stronger connection. Now there's a tool for that, they call it a pocket screw, and it allows you to drill a perfectly angled hole that will cause this screw to approach the other board at the perfect angle. Those types of joints are extremely strong as compared to something where we attach through the face grain into the edge grain. So I've set up an example here where we have screwed through the face into the edge grain of this second board, and let's just see if we can break it without breaking my hand. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to show. So in this case, we actually pulled this screw clean out of the end grain. Now in this case, obviously this one stayed in, so that's particularly strong connection. We actually split this board before it came out. But what I wanted to demonstrate is how this screw actually pulled out of the end grain. And that's why a lot of times people DIY projects and they're not very strong. So I've set up another experiment here using the pocket screws where I've gone through the face grain of this board into the face grain of this board. And look how much stronger. I mean, unbelievably strong. Very strong. You could probably stand on that. It looks like I managed to bend the screws a little bit, but you'll notice it's not ripping out and we haven't torn the face grain off of the board. Do you ever have a project where you just wish the screws weren't visible at all, but you can't really think of a great way to hide them? I'm going to show you a trick where you can actually use a piece of wood to plug the hole where you would put a screw. So another feature of the countersinking drill bit that I showed you earlier is that if you keep drilling, it'll actually drill a small recess where we can drill out a piece of wood that matches the hole and we can insert it in the hole. What we're going to use is a plug cutter, and it's designed to match to the drill bit so that the plug is the exact size of the hole that we drill. So if we drill our hole and countersink and keep going over the shoulder of this bit, it's going to drill a fairly deep hole. And now your screw can hide inside that hole. And now what we need is a piece of wood that we're going to call a donor piece of wood. It has the same coloring and grain characteristics as the one we're going to plug. I've got this little piece of scrap here. You can also buy these plugs, but as you can imagine, it's kind of hard to match the grain and the color. It's likely you have a piece of wood laying around that's as close to the color as you're going to get. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a plug out of this piece of wood and use it to fill our hole. And we're going to use our plug cutter to do that. And what we end up with is this little tiny donor plug. And what we can do is put a little bit of wood glue in the hole, put our plug in the hole, and we want to make sure that the grain on the plug lines up with the grain that we're trying to fill. And then use our hammer, and we can very gently tap the plug into the hole. with a light sand, that will look beautiful. And of course, if you're going to paint, this will just get painted over. If you make a plug like I have here that's a little bit too tall, after you glue it in, you can simply use a flush cut saw or a chisel to remove the excess and then finish it with a piece of sandpaper. When you're doing a project, do you ever feel like the screws are sticking out, like they're kind of above the surface and they're sort of ugly? I'm going to show you a couple of tricks to make the screws sit flush and make them nice and tidy. The first thing you can do is switch up the type of screw that you're using. This screw here is what's called a pan head screw. It has kind of a flat back to the head and the top is sort of round, and it's meant to grip the surface, but it's not meant to go below the surface. And if you can see, it has a pretty large head on it, so you might have to tighten down a lot to try to get it to go somewhat below the surface. It's not designed that way. This screw, on the other hand, is what's called a flathead screw. Notice that the head is slightly tapered on the bottom and it's flat on the top. This screw is actually designed to be flush with the surface. So you'll notice that even though both of these screws here are fully inserted, this one is sticking above and this one is below. But there's one more trick that we can use to make this a very tidy installation. When we want to drill a hole and we want the head of the screw to be flush and we want to maybe also minimize splitting in the face grain, we're going to use what's called a countersinking drill bit. So this is a drill bit and a countersink in one. As we drill the hole, this part of the bit here will actually make a nice perfect space for the screw to nest in. Notice the little shoulder? It's perfectly fitted to our screw. And just like that, we have a very nice finished screw below the surface. With this type of bit, you have to be careful because the further you push, notice the deeper the chamfer becomes. There are size-specific countersinks, so if you want to get a set, it will make sure that you always have the perfect size countersink for your screw. Just like the combo reversing VIX bit I showed earlier, this is actually a countersinking bit and driver in one. If we reverse this, we can put our favorite driver on one side and we've got our drill and countersink on the other side, which makes quick work of this task. A common mistake I feel like beginners and DIYers make is not having the right bit for the screws that you're trying to drive. And I think a lot of times that boils down to just having really bad bit organization and really not being able to find the bits that you need. I think about this little Ryobi case, it kind of looks like a Tic Tac case, am I right? I mean, way to just adopt somebody else's packaging. But I'll tell you, this is a horrifyingly bad way to organize your bits. This is a couple of ways I keep my bits organized, and I make sure that I always have the right bit for the task that I'm doing. One is these bit kits that you can get from most major manufacturers. They're not only well organized, but they also have a good assortment of bits that you're going to regularly use. And then this one is a screwdriver. Let me show you sort of how these work. So these bit kits are super handy because they have a couple of different lengths of bits, and they also have all of the major common sizes. And as long as you keep your bits organized, it's very quick to just reach in here and grab the bit that you need. I like to keep a bit extender in here as well as my nut drivers because I find that I use those a lot. And of course, this set includes a nice array of drill bits also. This one is actually a little bit more sneaky. I find myself using this a lot on electrical projects. It's got a lot going on. Hiding here in the handle is a full set of bits that are very well marked. And so it's very quick to grab a variety of different bits. But here is where the magic happens. This is actually a removable driver that can chuck up into an impact driver. So not only do I have a variety of bits, I have a magnetic bit holder, and I also have a driver for my impact, all hiding in this screwdriver. And so I find if I'm doing a lot of kind of honeydew or DIY projects, just having this screwdriver solves most of my problems. And those are some of the mistakes I see beginners and DIYers making with screws. Hopefully you benefited a bunch. If you like this video and you want to see more tips and suggestions on screws, we actually have a video that we recently make. We'll link to that up here. Give it a watch, and we'll see you on the next one.